mentioned the different tools that you have, your pen, you go on, Stephen King goes on a walk, and there's all these different tools that an author has when they're coming up with the creation. And what's really interesting is in our age, we now have social media, and your Tumblr, in your case, as it's starting to truly take off. And now we're really feeling these effects of social media. And you're arguably best known for your work on Instagram. And I was wondering, is it harder? Is it easier? What are these differences from the time of Seamus Heaney now to these days where we've got social media as a new tool in the toolbox?
I would say in a lot of ways, I think it's harder because there's so many platforms now. So when I have a lot of friends from back in my Tumblr days, and we always talk about the best thing about Tumblr was that it was a very chilled platform. You could put up anything you wanted and you wouldn't know what took off because social media used to be so much more of a democratic space then. It was pre them developing these algorithms. Everything was very chronological. So you shared something, whoever was online at the time would see it and they would share it or whatever, Now things have become so much more complex and so much more opaque, I would say. With gatekeepers, and I've always railed against gatekeepers, at least you know that, okay, they're gatekeepers. This is the kind of stuff they expect. With social media algorithms, you don't know what they're pushing. You know that they're going to push the stuff that gets the most engagement. And most of the time that is outrage content. And I've had to spend a lot of time thinking, where does poetry fit into that? Because poetry isn't about outrage. It's about the truth, and often very uncomfortable truths. But they're not there to provoke anger out of you at anything other than injustice, And I think there's a whole journey which I've kind of gone on where I'm very ambivalent about social media now. So I'm on one hand, I wouldn't have my career and where I am now without it. But on the other hand, I'm is this actually good for artists, for social media companies to have such a chokehold on what goes with art and what works with art. And I think I have a friend who talks very beautifully about this. Her name is Trista Matier. She's also a poet. But Trista basically says that every time some of us, which is working class poets, or immigrant artists, or people who aren't usually represented, we make it through, they kind of put up the walls behind us. And that's kind of how I see social media algorithms. I'm kind of really sad for the next generation of artists because they deserved the same democratic platform. But it's just not the same as it used to be. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you so much about the algorithm. Even for me as a consumer, I find so much, if I'm interested in something, it's coming up already. And for people there's such a confirmation bias with that, where people will like a certain kind of poetry or the kind of poetry from somebody from their socioeconomic class. They don't want their ideas challenged. And there's such a barrier there. You're right. So how do you think these sorts of, going beyond social media, how do you think these barriers to the getting into the arts world can be addressed? Say for like you say, working class, disadvantaged people. How do you think we can work at readdressing that?
Do you know, the good thing about the UK, because obviously I came from India, is that there are a lot of things like grants available to artists here. Of course, over the last 13 years, things have become far more difficult and far more challenging because of the cuts that have been put on, say, the Arts Council and these grants and things like that. But I still think that one of the best things in the world is when artists support other artists. And this is a community. The poetry world is a community. And the best support that I have received as an artist is from other artists. And I think making that network stronger, and not via social media, but like creating a network of people who are like you, who are artists or poets or writers, and then growing together. That's kind of how like so many of us grew from Tumblr. Like a lot of the well-known poets today on social media, we did all grow from Tumblr together. We all know each other and we all supported each other, you know. We shared each other's work. And I think that word of mouth and that support and the mentoring, of like an older poet mentoring a younger poet, those are the things that we can put into place as individuals to help and building that community. But I do think the arts needs money. And to be able to get that money, we need to break the chokehold that tech companies have on the arts right now. So, and that's a bigger conversation. There's a great book called Choke Point Capitalism. And one of the authors of that book is Cory Doctorow. And he talks about how tech companies have basically captured creative labor markets and how we can take them back. And it's a great book if you want to read further into that question. It's one of my highest recommended books. So, yeah.
That's brilliant. So it seems clear from what you've said and from my experience as well that social media and tech is changing the way that we view and consume poetry and art. But I think what's an even more interesting question is if you think social media has changed the way poetry is written.
Yeah. See, it's not the fault of the poets to a great extent, and it's certainly not the fault of any artist who does this. But one of the things I talk a lot about, especially in schools when I visit, is an art, and it's a running joke online actually amongst artist communities, that you take 5 minutes to write like a thought, a scribble, right? And that goes viral. But the piece that you took months to write or months to create, or that doesn't do as well. Now, psychologically, what does that do to the artist who spent the hours writing that piece, but then found the thing that he wrote or made in 5 minutes going viral? It tells him that you should make more of those 5-minute pieces, and what does that say on a larger scale about the arts? What does that say? What is that going to do to the next generation of artists? Like, we're not going to really know the damage of that algorithmic, pressure for at least another 10 years, and it's something which I'm writing a lot of like essays around digital existentialism. And, because obviously I'm in a good position to talk about it because my career depends on it. And the ambivalence and the pain of knowing that what the next 10 years are going to look like for the arts because of this algorithmic pressure and the performance that you have to do on social media, because people also want you to be really authentic, but it's also your business. So how do you separate the personal from the business side of things? It's very hard to do. And artists are kind of stuck in the middle of all of that.